Welcome to the Flying Dutchman podcast. Thank you for being here, and I want to introduce our special guest is Ed Cobleigh. He's been a fighter pilot and intelligence officer working with the CIA, the FBI, M16 on a variety of covert intelligence projects, and that's all we're going to say about that. He's also an author. His aviation adventure books have included a #1 bestseller. He has 5 books out now at this time. So we're just going to go right into a fast-paced interview with Ed Cobleigh, starting with his childhood, and he'll share some stories with us. And I hope you enjoy the show as much as I had talking with Ed. Very interesting fellow with a very interesting story. So without further ado, let's get ready, have a beverage, and listen to Ed Cobleigh. But so let's go back to your father was in the Army Air Corps in World War II.
No, he
was
he
a
joined the
colonel.
U.S. He joined the U.S. Army in 1939
Mm.
in the cavalry with horses, and was in the horse cavalry for 2 years. And then, of course, when 1941, when we entered the war, they mechanized and got rid of the horses. Anyway, he was transferred from Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, down to New Orleans. Met my mom, and here I am. But when he did his job, he came home from the war, got on with his life. He stayed in the reserves and eventually was promoted to colonel, but he never really talked about it. It was just back then. That's what you did. PTSD hadn't been invented yet, and so he just came home and got on with his life. And when he passed away, I realized I didn't know anything about what he'd done, and I had no idea what it was like to be in the horse cavalry. And I thought, man, that's a waste. And so I've got 2 daughters, 4 grandkids. I thought, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to put my stories down. And so when I cash in my chips, people will know, or my family will know what I did. And so I started putting the words down on paper or in the computer. And I found out that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing, doing the writing. And after I had 2 or 3 notional chapters, I had a buddy that was a journalist for Aviation Week. And he wrote James Bond type spy novels on the side. So I sent him a couple of the 3 chapters, and he said, people would like to read this. No kidding. Okay. So he said, let me know when your book's finished. So I went ahead and finished what I thought was a book. And he knew a guy in London who knew a guy in New York, and how that goes. And so the book was picked up by Penguin Books and initially published by Penguin. And so that was kind of the start of my writing career.
And the title of that book?
That was War for the Hell of It.
That was your experiences in Vietnam.
Exactly. It was my 2 years in Vietnam.
And the Phantom.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so before you got to the Phantom, you had to become an officer in the Air Force. What path did you take for that?
I went to Georgia Tech and went through Air Force ROTC there, and was commissioned when I graduated from Tech and sent to pilot school.
And that was at Webb Air Force Base?
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't think about this. You in your book, you pointed out that you were trained in one of the few aircraft that doesn't require a ladder to get inside of, the T-37, the Tweet.
Yep. You just step over the side and sit down.
Yeah, next to your instructor.
Right.
As opposed to a tandem.
I hated that airplane. It's a miserable airplane. It's hot. It's noisy. You don't sit on the center line, so you can't line up your acro. I'm glad to get rid of that.
Yeah. and then the White Rocket, the T-38.
Right.
And you talk, and I've spoken to a few pilots on the show and stuff, but the T-38, you really got to stay ahead of the jet in the pattern, and it comes for landing, and where you got to make it short and sweet.
Yeah, it's a hot airplane, or it still is.
Yeah.
And the landing was a challenge, but it was one of the ones that you learn how to do. But is interesting. The went on a cross country, two T-38s, two students, two instructors, and we flew up to Colorado Springs, Air Force Base there, Colorado Springs, and to refuel. We refueled, taxied out, and Buckley Field is a dual use airport, civilians and military.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy in the tower was talking to one of the civilians in the light plane, and he said, "Hold out." So we have two Air Force jet fighters on takeoff roll. And I said, "Air Force jet fighters, where?" And
You're right.
and the instructor said, "That's us, you moron."
And it was quiet all the way back to Texas after
that's
that.
that's right. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah,
So, assignment night, back when you graduated UPT, um, there were a lot of airframes to pick from, depending on how you
right,
scored, as opposed to
right,
nowadays.
yeah,
And you scored, and you were given a fighter slot,
right,
the F4 Phantom training,
right.
and that
That,
was at at Davis Monthan.
well, you went to radar school at Davis Monthan. They had the
Okay.
radar simulators,
Mm-hmm.
and then to George Air Force Base for the actual flight training.
And George was a shared base because there were starfighter F-104 starfighters at that base, weren't there?
They had left when I got there.
Oh,
Some of the
okay.
pilots were still hanging around doing other stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
the F-104s had already left when I got there. But the thing is, they knew that they were being replaced by the F4, and so in our squadron room before they left, they had modified the latrine and put two toilets, one in front of the other in the latrine, just like in the airplane. That was their view of the F4.
I like that sense of humor.
Yeah.
And um and also in your book you talk about the some employments of our weapon systems were kind of ill-gotten. The F-102 might be an example of being put in Southeast Asia, but especially the mission. What mission was the F-104 given that was not what it was intended for?
Well, it was two things. They wanted an air superiority fighter to escort B-52s, and they didn't have enough F4s. They weren't up to speed, and people still considered the F4 a ground attack airplane. So they sent a wing of 104s over there originally at Da Nang, and then they went to Yubon uh, to do the air superiority roll over North Vietnam, but they were totally unsuited because they had only a short range radar. They didn't have any electronic ECM gear to warn against SAM launches. They were really out of their depth. And the other part of it is the 104 at that time was fairly unreliable uh, due to insufficient development, and
Mhm.
they ended up losing a third of them. At least they lost a
Wow.
third of them and a third of their pilots on missions that they were not very capable of performing.
Mhm. That's a bad mistake.
Right.
The and with you now, you've trained your first you were trained radar operator, back seat of the F4, even though you were a rated pilot.
Yeah,
And
they called us weapon system operators, WSO.
WSOs, and they had a lot of people might not know this, but like the Navy F4s, there was no stick in the back, but the Air 4, was it the C or D that you had?
The D.
The D. There was a control stick back there, and you could fly that Phantom from the back
You could
seat.
do everything from the back seat that you could do from the front seat, except lower the flaps. You had to have help to lower the flaps,
Oh,
but yeah, you could fly the whole mission from the back seat, and I have done that.
uh-huh. The whole mission. That's interesting. And that's your first tour was in the back seat while you were in
Right.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
out of Yubon.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. the Air Force called us WISOs, WSOs, but
Hmm.
everybody in the wing called us Gibbs, which means guy in back.
Guy in back. That's a little impersonal, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's funny. And so you flew 375 missions between the two tours. The second tour, you were with the Satan's
They
Angels,
433rd, but
and that
both
was
tours were in the same squadron, same hooch, same people, same chow, everything.
Colonel Robin Old's old squadron, and
Yeah, he flew
Chappie.
with the 433rd before I got there.
Okay.
I met Oles several times, but I never
Uh-huh.
flew with him.
Oh, okay. But here's a caveat. You did spend two tours, same place, same hooch, but when you reported for your second tour of duty, it wasn't in Yubon, Thailand. It was in
No,
Da Nang, Vietnam. What happened, Mr.
well,
Nils?
you roll the dice and you get an assignment. And the assignment for my second tour was to wing at Da Nang. And so I reported. I was a little disappointed because I wanted to go back to Thailand. But I reported and said, okay, let's get on with it. And then at that time, you had to go through a week of ground school to learn the ropes there at Da Nang, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought was a pretty big waste of time because
Mm.
it doesn't take a week to learn an Air Force base. Anyway, at the end of the uh, ground school, there was three of us that had gone through there, and we were uh, given a welcome in briefing by the director of operations. And there was three of us. We walked into his office, and I could see that things are not going to go well at all because here's a guy that's the director of operations for a fighter wing in the middle of a war, and he's sitting at a desk which is completely bare. I mean, there was nothing on his desk,
Oh,
and I thought, what does this guy do? What is his job if he doesn't have any work on his desk? I didn't
yeah.
say anything. Didn't say anything, obviously. Anyway, he proceeded to give us one of the most extraordinary messages I have ever heard. He said that there's three squadrons here, three fighter squadrons, and he would not tolerate any competition between the squadrons. He wouldn't tolerate any competition between pilots. Everybody was the same, and everybody would perform the same. And uh, there's no uh, competition at all. Just do your job. And so that's the first time I'd ever heard anybody tell fighter pilots not to be competitive, you know.
Oh my.
And I thought, that's all I need to know about this guy, and that's
Hmm.
all I need to know about this wing. And so I went back to barracks at Hooch and got on the phone and called my old squadron in Thailand, of which there was still plenty of guys around that I knew from our first tour.
Hmm.
And so I called my ex-flight commander and said, you got to get me out of here. I'm not going to sit here for a year and not compete with anybody else.
Right.
And he said, we're having a lot of trouble with our laser guided bomb program. We need somebody who knows what they're doing. We'll get you over here and you can straighten out the laser guided bomb program. So I grabbed my flying gear, went down to the aerial port squadron, got on a C-130, Marine C-130, flew to Ubon, and no orders, no paperwork, no
It's up and
nothing.
left.
I just left. I deserted. Yeah. Anyway, I deserted. I checked in at the squadron, late in the afternoon. I'm airborne the first thing in the morning, and it took about a month for the paperwork to catch up with me. And eventually it did, and it all blew over. But that was the only time I ever went AWOL.
With a purpose. But let's expand a little bit on the laser guided bomb because the Air Force and Navy were just having a heck of a time going after the Dragon's Jaw, the Paul Domer Bridge. Air crews were
Right.
lost, aircraft were lost. And then the Navy was playing around with the walleye, but um, the Air Force out of Eglin, I think it was, but they had a add-on kit to a general purpose bomb that gave it fins and a laser seeker, and your squadron was tasked to employ it in combat.
Yeah, we were the. It had been tested at Eglin, but
Uh-huh.
that's a little different from real combat.
Sure.
And so we were the initial introductory squadron with the laser guided bombs. The program was called Paveway. These are Paveway weapons,
That's yes.
and it was spectacularly successful. There were many days where all 90% of the targets destroyed by the U.S. Air Force outside of South Vietnam were done by our squadron.
Wow.
You drop two bombs, you destroy two targets. Drop four, you destroy four targets. And so we were getting all the BDA, bomb damage assessment,
Hmm.
for the whole Air Force there. So it was one of the more spectacularly successful introductions that you could ever imagine.
Well, that explains why that your former squadron commander, if I remember you saying that correctly, what he said, yeah, we could use you up here because of we have this activity with
Yeah,
laser guided bombs.
the people that had done participated in the initial introduction all rotated back to the states, and
Hmm.
so it was kind of like teach yourself how to do this. And I was the first guy that came back that had actually done it before, and I was able to help people figure out what to do.
That must have been satisfying
Oh
to
yeah,
be to have that new weapon system that now it's just almost taken for granted with our laser, satellite guided, small diameter munition, all that stuff. But back then, that oh my gosh, we don't need to have as much assets under threat to drop our target. Um,
well the introduction was resisted by people that thought that it A didn't work and B that it was unmanly to steer a bomb with a laser. And so not only did we have to overcome the technical introduction of the weapon, we had to overcome the bureaucratic opposition to guided bombs, period, because there had been many experiments with guided bombs starting in actually World War One, carried on through World War Two, and that activity was never successful. So it
no,
gained a reputation for being Rube Goldberg sort of things that never worked.
it's kind of funny the culture throughout. I mean, wasn't the parachute considered
Well,
in World War
yeah,
One like
yeah, yeah. In the middle of World War One, there were introductions of parachutes that you could actually wear in an airplane, and the brass then thought that these parachutes came from the balloon establishment. You had these hydrogen filled balloons that were used for artillery spotting, and the people in the balloons in the balloon baskets that were doing the artillery spotting um, had a zillion cubic feet of hydrogen over their head. And at the introduction, the second they saw a German fighter plane or on the horizon, they wanted to get out of there quick, and so they gave them these parachutes, which worked fine, therefore it would seem to be logical to give pilots parachutes. But the brass at the time in the Royal Air Force and later on in the U.S. Army Air Force, none of whom were pilots. The generals and colonels hadn't come up through the ranks, but they were in charge of pilots. And the way they looked at it was there's these balloonists at the sound of a fighter plane, they jump out. And so if we give fighter pilots parachutes, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to jump out of the airplane instead of fighting like they should be. And so they refused to allow parachutes. In the Allied side, the whole war, the Germans introduced them in the last 6 months of the war. And one of the lives they saved was Ernest Udet, who
oh,
who eventually went on to be the commander of the Luftwaffe in World War II. But
Hmm.
he jumped out of an airplane with a parachute and obviously changed history.
Yeah, that's funny. And I think even speaking in modern times, I read an article where the system terrain avoidance, if a F-16 pilot's incapacitated, the aircraft's headed for the ground, this system will take over and
Yep.
bring it up level flight. Well, there was actually some resistance to that system, and when that
There,
was,
there was, because I think, I don't know who was resisting it, but I speculate that they worried about it working when it wasn't supposed to work. Because a lot of times, during a ground attack mission, you're actually pointed at the ground. And low level ground attack, you're 100, 200 feet over the ground. And they were worried that it would interpret that as being out of control and take control of the airplane. So,
oh,
so I think that's why the resistance was there.
okay, that's a
Nobody is going to resist something that's going to save your life.
okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So, as we conclude the discussion on laser guided bomb, you were tasked to go visit the Navy and discuss the LGBs.
Well, that the thing,
Oh,
as I said earlier, the LGB program was spectacularly successful, and we were destroying more targets than anybody else put together. And at that time, the Air Force and the Navy were very highly competitive, and the brass of the Navy saw the Air Force succeeding where their pilots were not, and they said, find out what these laser guided bombs are and go get some. So they bought a bunch of kits from Texas Instruments, put them on the USS Hancock, and the idea was to introduce the laser guided bombs and get some of the glory that the Air Force was getting. What they didn't realize at first was that laser guided bombs takes a laser to guide them,
hmm.
and they didn't have any lasers that they could mount on the airplanes like we did. So and they had no experience in dropping the bombs. They had no idea what their capabilities were, how to use them. And so they sent me over there to straighten out the U.S. Navy.
The USS Hancock, because of the type of carrier it was, could not have Phantoms. It was
No,
mainly
A4.
Sky Raiders, A4s, F8 Crusaders.
Right.
So that's a handicap, I would think. But so now you have to convince Skyhawk pilots,
Well,
and they incorporated a Crusader in the conversation.
well, their laser was, picture a shoebox with a leather handle on each end and a gun sight on the top. That was their laser.
Oh,
You held it up like a shoebox and looked through the gun sight and hopefully illuminated the target. And you had to do this from the back seat of a TA4J, two-seat A4.
mm-hmm.
And nobody in the A4 community wanted to do that. So the F8 Crusaders are always unserviceable because they're getting old. So they would stick a Crusader pilot who considered himself the world's greatest fighter pilot
Yeah.
in the back seat of the A4 to illuminate these bombs. And the whole system was not going to work. It was just not going to work. But the Crusader guys were all pissed off that they were being used as bombardiers,
Mm-hmm.
and handheld laser was too jittery. You can't hand hold a laser with sufficient precision to guide the bomb to a direct impact. So the whole
Right.
program was ill conceived.
And then you were just sent back to your squadron, huh?
Yep.
And so you've completed your missions. Your time in Vietnam is over, and it's time to be sent elsewhere. And you were sent to Nellis after
Right.
Vietnam?
Right. Yeah. The fighter weapons school there realized that these terminally guided munitions, is what we called them, were the
Mm-hmm.
wave of the future, but they didn't have anybody there that knew anything about them because the instructors at the weapons school typically came from the operating squadrons, and they had a lot of experience there. And then as a reward, they got sent to the weapons school to be instructors. So none of them had any background in terminally guided weapons. So there was 4 or 5 of us that were designated the terminally guided weapons flight and sent there to incorporate that into the weapons school curriculum.
Well, that's good. And fighter weapons school is really that's a prestigious thing to be attached to and to participate in and be a graduate of. It's pretty
Right.
intense training, very intense training. It still goes on today.
Yes.
You spent time at MacDill Air Force Base in the F4,
Right.
and you got jumped by a P-51 Mustang.
Yeah, we were practicing instrument approaches over Tampa Bay, and you had to do a certain number of instrument approaches. It was late in the afternoon or early evening, and
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to do a instrument approach. And over on the other side of the bay was the Cavalier Aircraft Company, who converted P-51s to civilian use and sold them to very rich people who wanted their own fighter pilot. And so I'm on downwind, practicing my instruments. And the backseater looks out and says, "We're getting bounced by a P-51." And some guy in a test flight in a P-51 decided he would have some fun with this Air Force guy and roll in behind him and, pretend to shoot him down. And so uh, my what I should have done was ignore him and let him do his thing, but I couldn't do that. So I sucked up the gear and flaps and lit the afterburners and turned into him. And that didn't go well at all because a P-51, particularly at a slow speed that you're in the instrument pad, can outturn an F4, 3 to 1. So the
Yes.
next thing I know, I'm looking at the belly of this P-51 and he's tracking me with his simulated gun pass. So I lost that dogfight in about 10 seconds.
He was applying proper lead. Now, did you spend time at Top Gun after you did your time in Iran, or did you do that before you went to Iran?
Um,
When you flew with Randy Cunningham and that group.
as I remember, I went to Iran in 2 summers. I spent 2 summers in Iran, and I
Okay, 73 and
and
74.
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that the Top Gun thing was after that.
Okay.
But
Well, we
anyway,
can.
the Air Force realized that these Top Gun guys were doing some good work down there in the air-to-air arena, and they wanted somebody to go down there and figure out what they were doing. So they sent me down there to in effect, go through the Top Gun school and check out as a Top Gun instructor and bring all that Navy knowledge back to Las Vegas. And
Mhm.
that's what I did. Randy Cunningham checked me out as an adversary pilot, which was interesting experience. And that was my time at Top Gun.
So and the adversary is you being a Phantom driver. The adversaries were A4s and
Yeah,
F5s.
that's what I flew was the A4.
The A4 and the Mongoose
Yeah,
A4.
they took A4 films and stripped them. No guns, no gun sight, no just a radio and an airplane and an engine.
Hmm.
Bolted up the leading edge slats, no nose wheel steering. It was how light can we make an A4? And they put the big engine, the 408 engine in there. So
Oh wow.
these were hot rods up to
Yeah.
about point 0.9, and then they kind of hit the wall of compressibility.
Uh-huh. Well, that would have been a little hot rod to fly for sure.
Yeah.
And so you went back to Nellis with this naval knowledge of Top Gun, and you imparted it on the newly formed aggressor squadron at Nellis, or
Well, yeah, it was um, Steve Ritchie was, of course, the U.S. Air Force ace,
yes.
and when he came back from his fifth kill, uh, Ritchie has a lot of baggage. One of the things that he did really well, he was supposed to go back to Washington and get his medals and meet the chief of staff and do all the PR stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he stopped in at the weapons school on his way, and he said, he told us, the instructor said, "What should I tell him? What do you need?" And at that time,
That's a good question.
we knew that Top Gun had adversary aircraft. They had F-5s, they had A-4s.
Mm-hmm.
All we had was F-4s, so we spent all our time fighting each other. And we told Richie, we said, we need an aggressor squad. We need a squadron of people that are not flying F-4s, that are flying airplanes that you can use to simulate MiGs. And so Richie went back to the Pentagon and spread that gospel. And the first T-38, which is what we got, arrived a week later. So
Wow, they listened.
they listened. Yep.
And that aggressor squadron continues today in
Yeah.
different forms. You know, that's
Yeah.
the F-5s. It's
The 433rd is now the F-22 weapons
wow.
squadron.
Wow, very cool. That is
Yeah.
very cool. So Iran, the Shah of Iran and his sister, who was probably pulling most of the strings, um, purchased the F-4 Phantom in addition to a lot of other Western aircraft. And you were tasked to, was it voluntary or were you ordered to go to and teach them the Phantom?
Um,
How'd that work out?
the squadron DO called me into his office and said, "You're leaving for Iran." So
Oh, okay. So you volunteered.
that's right. So I said, "Okay, I volunteer to go."
Uh-huh.
But anyway, the Shah got what he wanted. Whatever he wanted, he got, and he realized that his fighter cadre, he had a handful of guys that had flown F-86s and F-84s, and they had 2,000 hours of fighter time, but most of his squadron mates were guys right out of pilot training.
Oh.
And so he wanted somebody to go over there and at least teach them the basics of fighter operations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for 2 summers.
Did you enjoy your time over there, huh?
I did. The Persians were wonderful people to
They
work
are.
with. I enjoyed the food. I even
Mm.
enjoyed the wine. They had Shiraz there, and once you learn the lay of the land, like anywhere
Mm-hmm.
else, where you go to Iran or Paris or Bazirkistan, you have to learn what the normal
Yeah,
behavior patterns are. And once you
right.
learn that, things went fine.
Well, they did. And the culture, trying to impart wisdom on a pilot that's just not doing something right, the way you have to convey the corrective counseling talk on that can sometimes it has to be done a little bit differently because
Oh
of
yeah,
who you're talking to.
but it's the culture. It's the
Uh-huh.
culture,
You
and that's
can't.
what you have to learn. In the U.S., you go out in a flight, and the student screws it up, and you come back and you say, "Boy, you really screwed this up, you moron!"
Right, right.
And then the next day he goes out and does it right. But in Iran, you don't. That technique doesn't work. You have to. Uh, it's almost like an Oriental loss of face thing. And
Okay.
so you go out with a Persian pilot and he doesn't do well, and you come back and you don't tell him you're a moron. You say, that maneuver did not go as we had planned, and it's all my fault because I didn't instruct you properly on how to do it. And had I been a better instructor, you would have succeeded. And so when you took that approach, the Persian guys would say, "Oh, no, no, Captain Ed, I really screwed up and I'll do it better." So that's the approach you had to take.
Interesting. And not that you guys were intentionally trying to take out the Shah of Iran, demonstrating a Maverick missile and you never squeeze off a round before your air show center, or what's going on with the Maverick missile
Well,
demonstration?
the second tour I went over there to introduce the TV guided Maverick,
Mm-hmm.
terminally guided missile, and that was a lot of fun. But the graduation exercise, we were going to shoot a missile for the Shah of Iran because he'd spent a ton of money on this, and so it was a big deal. The commander of the Air Force was there, and the Shaw and all his horse holders. And one of our students was going to demonstrate the missile. They took a tank, obsolete tank, and parked it on the other side of the runway, and seeded it with jet fuel and diesel fuel so it would blow up nice. And anyway, Major Vaezi was supposed to take this out with a missile. But one of the things that our training didn't cover, which it should have, was when you train with a missile, you have a captive missile, and you go out and you practice locking on the captive missile. And he was very good at doing that. But when you have a live missile, you have to lock the missile on and then let the computer settle down, let the tracking gate settle down, let the missile get its stuff together. And it takes 1 or 2 seconds before you launch the missile. And so Vaezi rolled in, picked up the tank, locked on the missile, and immediately hit the pickle button, which launches the missile. And so the missile broke lock during launch and started a lift climbing turn right at the reviewing stand. And I was on the reviewing stand standing a little ways from the Shaw, and I knew exactly what had happened. As the missile came off, started at Shondell to the left, and I'm looking right at the missile coming at us. And the Shaw had survived several assassination attempts. And he had this Praetorian Guard called the Immortals that always traveled with, like the Secret Service. It was the Persian version of the Secret Service. And they had a contingent of highly armed Immortals around the reviewing stand. And I thought, man, this looks like an assassination attempt. If the missile doesn't get us, the Immortals are going to kill me.
There's going to be hell to pay for this.
Right. Anyway, the missile kept climbing and went over the top of the reviewing stand at about 1,000 feet and disappeared into the desert. So nobody on the reviewing stand knew what had happened but me, and I kept my mouth shut. I got on the radio and I told Vaezi, I said, try it again, lock on, and don't launch the missile for 2 seconds. And he did, and it took out the tank, and it blew up spectacularly, and the Shaw was happy, and the Immortals didn't kill us.
You can have Shiraz later that evening.
Right.
So at your time, at your time at Nellis, is that where you applied to be a Thunderbird at one time? Did you not?
Yeah. I was invited to try out for the team, and I went and flew with them. Of course, at that time they flew the F4, so you could easily fly in the back seat. And so I went and flew in the back seat with the Thunderbirds for a week, and that was interesting.
I bet.
Yeah,
but I think you indicate in your book that maybe you might have shot yourself in the foot at a chance at flying with the Thunderbirds because you were in front of the panel for the interview piece.
Yeah, at the end of the week, there was 3 of us that were vying for the one slot on the Thunderbirds. And at the end of the week, they had like a murder board, and all the Thunderbird pilots were sitting at a long table, and you came in and saluted and sat down, and they started firing questions at you. And the idea is that how do you handle yourself under verbal pressure? Because Thunderbirds, they do press meetings, and they meet the public, and and you got to be able to handle yourself verbally during a high stress situation. And so they were firing questions at me, and I thought I was doing pretty well. And the last question was, well, you've flown with the team for a week. Do you think you can hack the flying? Do you think you can perform as a Thunderbird pilot? And I said, well, the correct answer is I don't see how I could ever be as good as you people. The B answer is if I bust my ass, I just might be able to do it. And the D- answer is it didn't look all that hard.
And you chose D.
Yes, I chose D.
And There's the door.
Right. And the commander looked up at the door and said, "Next."
That's funny. I want to talk about really quick that um, you then were offered an exchange pilot, or were you again told to volunteer to be an exchange?
I volunteered for that one because I did spent 3.5 years at Nellis,
Uh-huh.
and so I was ready for an assignment, and I would probably have been sent to Germany into one of the German squadrons over there,
Hmm.
or a staff job. I was
Ooh.
offered a I was, I was offered a staff job and didn't want that much. The other job I was offered is a staff writer for Air Force Magazine,
Oh, I
and
remember.
yeah, and I thought, well, that was interesting, but you had to move to Washington. You didn't get to fly airplanes, so I didn't take that. So I volunteered for an exchange tour, and at that time there was exchange pilots with the Australians and the Canadians, and
Hmm.
the Royal Air Force. So I got the Royal Air Force slot.
And you kind of
And
like that because you have a little bit of a history buff in you in the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force,
yeah,
and
I've always been interested in the Battle of Britain. And one of the highlights of my tour was I got to meet some people who were actually in the Battle of Britain.
yes, you did.
Yeah,
Who were
which
these people?
well, there was Johnny Johnson, who was, I think he had 21, 27 kills. There
Spitfire
was,
pilot?
yeah, there was Douglas Botter,
Wow.
the guy with the artificial legs, and those are the two most famous guys. But I met other guys who were, not famous, but had been in the Battle of Britain.
Well, you had also met Adolf Galland, right?
No, I didn't. No, I
No?
didn't.
Oh,
No.
okay. Going back to Douglas Bader, you mentioned he had artificial leg. He was a hurricane pilot most of his time,
Yeah,
but he became a prisoner of war at one point, did he not?
he
And
did. Yeah, he Botter wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. You know,
mhm.
he had a lot of unworkable ideas, and
Uh-huh.
and after the Battle of Britain, the next summer, uh, they had a bunch of operations called Rhubarb. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It was
No, I have not.
Operation Rhubarb, and it was low level ground attack across the Channel. And so you took off from England, flew across the Channel, and roamed around France and Belgium and the Netherlands looking for targets of opportunity. And Botter was on a rhubarb mission and decided a good target of opportunity would be a German fighter base,
Ooh.
which was ringed with AAA. And so he ended up jumping out.
Well, did they not fly his artificial leg and dropped it off?
The RAF did. He had two artificial legs,
Uh-huh.
and so they got some brave soul who, I don't know if they notified the Germans in advance or not, but they had a brave soul that flew down the runway of the fighter base and threw out the artificial legs so that Butter could walk around in prisoner of war camp.
Yeah. That's an interesting story. The aircraft you first had to go to Boscombe Down
Right.
or and that's where you were introduced to flying and communicating the English way.
Well, you had to learn to speak English. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the Jet Provost was the
Right.
aircraft that which oh I'll probably put a picture of that aircraft up as we talk. Much like what the T-37 is to us, the Jet Provost is to the Brits.
Yeah. It was
And
picture a jet T-37 twice the size, and you got it.
yeah, yeah, and there's one on display at the McClellan Aerospace Museum.
Yeah.
And I've had a chance to see that. And you did a flat spin inverted in that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you part of the curriculum on the T-37 was spins. You
Uh,
had to learn to get out of a spin, and that was kind of fun. It's kind of fun to do, and not that difficult. Um, the difficult one was an inverted spin. A vertical spin, you follow a procedure, you come out. an inverted spin, all the controls are reversed and all the inputs are reversed. So you have to reverse what you're doing. And
Oh,
the airplane doesn't really want to come out of the spin. I never did an inverted spin in a T 37 because you had to go to pilot instructor school to do that.
uh-huh.
But in the Jet Provost, inverted spins were normal. You could do them. And I did one, and that was enough.
That would be it. Yeah, I bet. That's where you are upside down, flat spin.
Right.
And so part of learning to speak things this way is when we say afterburner, the British say,
Reheat. Yeah.
and a touch and go, they
It was a
call.
roller in the
Uh-huh.
landing gears, the undercarriage. You had to learn all that terminology. It was not
Yeah.
that.
No, no. And did you know what airframe you were going to get once you were done with your
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that
The Jaguar was just being introduced to the RAF,
uh-huh.
and no U.S. pilot ever flown it. I was the first one to fly
Oh.
it, and so they wanted somebody to go and get experience in the Jaguar.
Hmm.
So I was posted to the OCU, Operational Conversion Unit, and our job was to train Jaguar pilots. And so I was the first American to do that.
And that was in Scotland?
Yeah, Lossy Mouse,
Lossiemouth?
Scott. Yeah,
Yeah. There must be some good fish and chip pubs up that way, I would imagine.
not really. That
No.
that's an English thing. There's
Oh, you're Scotland. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of. Oh, I mean, there's salmon, haddock, herring. There's
Huh.
plenty of fish,
Sure.
but fish and chips were not as big as they are down south.
Oh, and the weather.
Better than the south.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because we had more clear air flying days than the bases down south did, due to the Scotland being that far north. We were in the same latitude as Oslo, Norway, and so we didn't get the low hanging clouds that we used to
Oh,
get down in England.
okay. What'd you think of the Jaguar?
It was designed to be a advanced trainer, a low level advanced trainer, and it did that job very very well. You could fly, and I've done it. You could fly it below 200 feet, 480 knots for an hour 45.
Wow.
So you could fly from John O'Groats to Land's End at 200 feet, 480 knots,
Wow.
and and that's what it's designed to do, and it did that well.
Hmm.
But then halfway through the development of the Jaguar, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said, "You're spending £5 million on an airplane that doesn't have any combat capability." So they hurriedly uh, developed a combat version, single seat version with guns, and it it was out of its depth. It didn't have enough thrust. It didn't. The cockpit design wasn't optimum for weapons delivery, uh, and as a combat airplane, it lacked a lot. Now, having said that, during Desert Storm, they sent 8 Jaguars to the desert, and they did very well. So I, I should caveat that said
Yeah.
they eventually made a good airplane.
Yeah. It was pretty popular. It was an Anglo-French design.
Right.
Much like, yeah. And Oman, India, I think Sudan,
Ecuador.
Ecuador.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, those. Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty export successful. And you were doing flying with the French
Yeah.
and
We flew the same airplane.
hmm
And so a couple of three times a year, they would send a contingent over to us, and another 2 or 3 times a year, we'd go over there and fly with them.
hmm
Um, the idea was to exchange tactics and training tips, but it was really just a lot of fun.
Yeah. But I think you might have been the flight lead, and you had there were three others in your flight,
Yeah,
and
this
you
was
guys, you know
this
where I'm
was
going with this?
yeah, this was over the Great Glen, in Scotland, Loch Ness, and we had four Jaguars, two French, two British, in a four-ship formation at low level over Loch Ness, and that was pretty spectacular. But the further south we got, the lower the ceiling got, and I could look up ahead, and we were down to 100 feet over the water, and 480 knots. But I'd look up ahead, and there was a cloud bank, I mean a fog bank. So in just a few seconds, we were going to be in the clouds, and there's nothing you could do about it. And so I had anticipated this, and I had briefed a procedure that we always used. And the idea was that the leader stays on his heading, and you call pull up, go, and the whole formation pulls up into the cloud and joins up on top. And the way it's supposed to work is the leader maintains his heading, the guy in his wing turns 10 degrees to the left, the guy in his right wing turns 10 degrees to his right, the outside guy turned 20 degrees to the right, and so that the fan of the climbing airplanes diverge as you go through the clouds. And so when it works well, you emerge from the top of the clouds and you can see everybody, and you're all within a mile or so of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called it, and we went up through the clouds. And during the climb, I felt a bump and a shadow over the airplane. And it was not unusual because a lot of times you had embedded the rain cells in the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was just a dense part of the cloud. And we pulled up out on top. My wingman number two was right where he should be, but I couldn't find the French guys. They were supposed to be on my right. They weren't. I mean, I couldn't see them. I thought, oh man, I hope they didn't hit the ground or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked to the left, and they were on the other side of the formation. They had passed through the formation in the clouds, and what the shadow that I had seen was the shadow of a French Jaguar over the top of my canopy.
Oh, that's scary.
And I said, well, we got to figure out what went wrong here because we can't do this again. And so we usually, in these Anglo-French missions, we usually debrief at the bar. But I said, no, we need to figure out what happened here. And what had happened was, remember I said the separation was 10 degrees or 20 degrees.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize, that probably should have, is that the French airplanes fly on magnetic north and the Jaguars fly on true north.
Oh.
And the difference between magnetic north and true north in Scotland is 10 degrees. And so I had briefed a midair. it was had it been flown properly, we would all die. But
oh my gosh. Yeah. I could imagine with no clouds, if we could visualize what that would have looked like of the jets.
Yeah.
That's scary close.
Yeah.
And how long you said how long did you spend on the exchange duty?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. And all in the Jaguar.
Right.
So then you come back to the States.
And left active duty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my daughters were getting school aged, and
yeah,
and I didn't want to, in the Air Force you move every 2 or 3 years, and I didn't want to put them through it.
Yeah.
My wife wanted a career of her own, and so it was time to seek greener pastures.
Okay, and some of that greener pasture is interesting, and it's actually things that you don't write in a book, and we're not going to talk about some of the work that you did as a civilian, but you went to work for who afterwards? But you did
Hughes Aircraft.
Hughes Aircraft, and let's jump back in time because so as we close this out, I want to talk again about a mission in Vietnam, a nice, bright, white cultural center near the Plains of Jars, I think, if I remember correctly.
Right.
What did you have against that cultural center,
It
Mr.
looked
Ed?
like the bad guys. I
Yeah.
the visibility was terrible. They were burning the rice fields, and so there
Hmm.
was smoke and low scud all over the place.
Hmm.
And the forward air controller, the Raven Fac, had put in uh, uh, white phosphorus marking rocket on the target we were supposed to hit. And the white phosphorus, it's a big cloud of white smoke. And I had a lot of trouble picking it up. And I saw what I thought was a cloud of white smoke, and it turned out to be the Chinese Cultural Center,
The
which,
Chinese Cultural Center.
yeah, the Chinese were trying to. There's a lot of Han Chinese that live across the border in China, and they were trying to infiltrate into Laos and Thailand. And the
Hmm.
cultural center was designed to make that easier, but it ceased to exist.
And and who found out?
The
Nobody.
ambassador,
The ambassador found out. Yeah.
the ambassador to Thailand found out. And anyway, all the shit rolled downhill and landed on my head. So
Right.
that was not one of my finest hours.
No, it's not. And so um now here we are in your home and where you live now,
Right.
and you enjoy a good wine. You travel to Paris on occasion, if I remember
Whenever I
correctly,
can. Yeah.
whenever you
Yeah.
can. Yeah, you're fluent in French, can read French. And before the pandemic, a group of friends would meet at a French restaurant once in a while in the town that you live in.
Yeah. In Paso Robles. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And there was a Vietnamese woman
Yeah. Yeah. We
that
were, we were practicing our French, and I was talking to this older Vietnamese lady,
uh-huh.
and she had been born in Saigon. And as part of the elite at that time, of course, Vietnam was a French colony.
Hmm.
And so she was bilingual in French and Vietnamese. And I thought we were having a good conversation. And she said, "Have you ever been to Vietnam?" And I said, "I've been there 100 times, and I didn't really care for it because every time I went there, people tried to kill me." And so then she asked me what I'd done, and I told her, and she said, "You might have been the guy that bombed my cousin who lives up near Hanoi." And I said, "Yeah, it could be." I said, "Is your is your cousin still with us?" And she said, "Yeah, I think he's still alive." And I said, "Well, then it wasn't me."
That's a pretty good comeback.
Yeah,
Well, Ed, I
yeah,
want to,
yeah.
do you
Can
have,
can I pitch? Can I pitch my books?
well, I was going there. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
I definitely, because you've written 5 books total,
right.
and
There are
I'm lucky enough to
yeah,
have,
two memoirs,
uh-huh.
and both of those were Amazon #1 bestsellers. Um, I think you have them there. Yeah,
I do. I have, here's what I have is,
yeah. That's the last memoir.
okay,
Uh,
this is about your experiences with the Royal Air Force, the Imperial
yeah,
Iranian Air
everything
Force.
but combat, everything but
Uh-huh.
pilot training, all that.
And that brings us to this book here.
That's 2 years. That's the 2 years of combat. These are
Yeah, in
all war
Vietnam.
stories. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I've
very
got
colorful. You mentioned I found it interesting, is the major sitting on the porch. This poor guy in Yubon just dreaded combat. He was
yeah,
fearful of it. He had probably premonitions of his demise in this combat. And unfortunately, he took a direct hit and died.
you're right.
But yet there were times, or there was a time when you were going back to your hooch, this is 2 months after he had was killed in
Right.
this, and you're seeing him sitting on that porch like he always
I
did.
did. I did. I did.
Yeah, I find that interesting that his, perhaps the level of anxiety and emotion imprinted him for that
Yeah.
time and that. Yeah,
Right.
it's very interesting. But so we've covered, excuse me, we covered 2 of the books that I have that you wrote. I
Yeah.
I would we'll talk about offline, but I would like to send you a book if you would autograph it and I'd pay for the
Sure.
postage and
Well,
sign it.
just tell me which one you want, and I'll autograph and send it.
Oh, okay, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
All five. No.
and
What are your other three books that you wrote?
well, there's one called The Pilot: Fighter Planes in Paris. That's a novel set in Paris, but it features air combat from World War One to Operation Desert Storm, and interdisposed with a Parisian love affair. So
Okay.
it's a literary aviation novel.
Okay. Are
Uh,
these pilots, and forgive me for my ignorance on this, are these fiction pilots in missions, or are these actual people that you've plugged in?
Fiction. It's all
Okay,
fiction,
yes.
but
Okay.
it's based on my experiences.
Yes.
And there's five different airplanes in the book, and I could write the F-104, the F-4, and the F-16 chapters myself because I experienced them. I
Hmm.
knew guys that flew the F-86 in Korea. RAF mates helped me with the Spitfire chapter,
Oh,
but I was stuck on the Sopwith Camel. I said, okay, I'm just going to have to rely on Wikipedia. And in doing the research, I found out that there were three authentic flying Sopwith camels in the world. One's in Australia, one's in the RAF Museum in London, and one's in Paso Robles, California.
no.
Yeah. So I went out to the airport, I found the camel pilot and had him be the beta reader on the camel chapter. So,
Wow.
but, but
Huh.
anyway, that's a novel. It's done very well. I
Uh-huh.
mean, um, another book is the um, biography of Roland Garros. We talked about this before. Roland Garros was the first fighter pilot. He invented the fighter and demonstrated the first fighter plane. And he was a contemporary of the Wrights, of Glenn Curtis, of Santos Dumont,
Hmm.
and did a lot of flying prior to World War One. And then in 1915, he demonstrated the first fighter plane. So he had a fascinating life.
And a
And
ladies' man as well.
I've heard that, yes.
Do
But
you know, did he survive World War One?
no,
Okay.
not giving it away, but uh, he had shot down three Germans, and then he was forced down behind German lines. Some people say engine failure, some people say a bullet in the engine. But anyway, he landed and was captured and spent nearly 3 years as a prisoner of war,
Oh, wow.
and then escaped. And how he escaped is a matter of great conjecture that I cover in the book.
Oh, good.
Made his way across Germany to the Dutch border, made his way into Netherlands, and made his way back to Paris. And he was assigned a staff job in the Air Force headquarters, and he wanted to go back to combat. He had three kills, and he wanted two more to be an ace.
Hmm.
So he pulled enough strings he got to get assigned back to the fighter squadron, but it did not go well.
Wow. Well, that'd be a good read, especially as
Yeah,
Escape.
yeah,
There's a lot of good reads when you do read some about some like the German pilot that was sent to POW camp in Canada. He escaped and managed to get all the way back to Germany.
yeah, yeah.
That's yeah, yeah. The one that got away, the movie was made from that. And what is your other book, your third book then?
Yeah, there's after the biography, I wrote another novel. It's called Fly with a Falcon, and it's set on the Central Coast. It's set on Santa Rita Hills, Morro Bay, Ragged Point, Big Sur, the whole place.
Yeah,
And
beautiful country.
the subject of the book is sexual harassment in the U.S. Air Force
Hmm.
and peregrine falcons.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it's the peregrine falcon is an avatar for escaping sexual harassment.
I
So
see.
it has combat in the Gulf. I said it's a novel; it's all made up. It has
Yeah.
combat in the Gulf, and there's three protagonists: two F-16 pilots, one male, one female,
Hmm.
and a peregrine falcon. And
Interesting.
and how they interact is the story of the book.
Ah, oh, very cool. And that's 5 books. That's to be commended
Yeah.
for sure. Do you feel that you already have a sixth book up there in your
No,
head?
no, no. I'm
No?
I'm tapped out.
Are you?
I'm fresh out of idea. If I have another idea, I will, but I don't have one right now.
Oh, okay. And then you have a museum not too far from you that's on my bucket list.
Yeah, the Strela Warbirds Museum here at the
Yeah.
local airport. Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good little museum. We've got look it up. It's ewb.org, I think it's Strela
Uh-huh.
Warbird, and it's worth a visit. It's worth a afternoon visit.
Yeah, I think you have a M60A3 tank
Yep.
at that
Yeah.
museum. That's what I was on when I was in the Army.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
good to go see one of those.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Ed, I want to send my appreciation for you being on the show. I'm going to stop recording, but then we'll have a few words, a sidebar conversation, and then I'll give you back your day.
Well, thanks for hosting me.
Yeah, Brett, it was very nice of you to agree to be on the show, especially because I'm like a new guy, so nobody knows who I am. And we might get a whole 50 views out of here. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Okay.